Verkiezingen in Amerika. Soms een duidelijke winnaar, vaak spannend en soms is de uitkomst een verrassing, zoals in 1948.
Do you remember 1948?
Well, maybe. It's a long time ago.
It was elections.
Yes.
It was President Harry Truman running against Thomas Dewey.
Yes.
Do you remember?
Yes, I do. I do.
What do you remember of that period?
In Philadelphia komen eens in de 4 jaren de gedelegeerden van de Republikeinse Partij uit de 48 Amerikaanse staten bijeen om hun gemeenschappelijke kandidaat voor het presidentschap te kiezen. Na eindeloos geharrewar achter de schermen hebben de andere reflectanten zich teruggetrokken en kan de voorzitter aankondigen dat Thomas Dewey eenstemmig als kandidaat voor de Republikeinse Partij werd aangewezen.
In all humility, I accept the nomination.
What kind of a man was your father?
Well, to a great extent, what you saw was what you got. He was disciplined, extremely punctual for a politician, single-minded, extremely hardworking. Away from government, he could relax, but it wasn't night and day. I mean, he was still the same determined, disciplined person that you saw in public.
3 weken geleden vergaderden de Republikeinen, nu komen de Democraten in hetzelfde gebouw bijeen om hun kandidaat voor de presidentsverkiezingen aan te wijzen. Zij werken in dezelfde stijl als hun tegenstanders, al is hun congres over het geheel wat minder enthousiast en luidruchtig. Enkele vertegenwoordigers van zuidelijke staten hebben de vergadering verlaten, omdat ze zich bij de vaststelling van het partijprogramma niet konden neerleggen bij de erkenning van gelijke rechten voor blanken en negers. Truman aanvaardt zijn benoeming.
I accept the nomination.
He was a common, ordinary, Main Street, small-town American. And he understood the small towns, he understood people. He'd been a farmer. He'd grown up as a farmer. He came from a family of several generations of farmers. He had not gone to college. His father had gone bankrupt in some ill-ventured business deals, and Truman, after graduating from high school, had to go home and help run the family farm.
Dewey stond met minimaal 60-40% voor, haast niet meer in te lopen. En een van de polls hield daarom zelfs al op met peilen. Wat kon Dewey nog gebeuren? Met een bijna triomfantelijk zelfvertrouwen ging de Republikeinse kandidaat daarom op campagne. Met het middel dat er in die tijd voor ter beschikking stond. De trein.
Very few people in this country had television sets in 1948. And it was this face-to-face confrontation and the educational part of the campaign that made that so much different from the campaigns we see today.
One major speech each day. And that would be delivered from a baseball park or a stadium or an auditorium before a radio audience to a large crowd. And then in between the major cities, at these small towns, sometimes as small as 3,000 or 4,000 people, the train would stop for 10 or 15 minutes and Truman would talk informally to the crowd. All this had been advertised well in advance, so there would be a sizable number of people there.
Confident of a Republican victory, Thomas Dewey of New York, Republican nominee for president, starts on a campaign tour with Mrs. Dewey. This time the Republicans mean business and they don't mean maybe.
Governor Dewey was so confident of his election that he was very careful not to raise any controversial subjects. Generalities, platitudes. He was a wonderful speaker. He had a magnificent voice, and he could make even the simplest homilies sound like very impressive speeches. But the content just wasn't there.
While Dewey makes his second try, another contestant goes directly to the people. President Truman, with his running mate Alben Barkley, continues his coast-to-coast appeal to his constituents.
Newspapermen would tell us how the Truman crowds were so much larger and so much more enthusiastic than the Dewey crowds. So we sensed that things were moving steadily in Truman's direction. Whether they would move far enough, fast enough, by November election was an uncertainty.
Now the Truman train rolls south to Sacramento, capital of California. Tanned from long auto rides in the sun at every major stop, he looks hale and jovial in spite of his strenuous program. Like California's weather, the crowd's reception too is warmer.
He was very much a man of the people. Dewey seemed to be so effete, so elite. He didn't seem to be a man that we would vote for.
The Dewey train was very relaxed, very orderly, very systematic. Everything was scrupulously organized. And to them, we appeared to be just chaotic, disorganized.
Thomas E. Dewey, Republican presidential candidate, goes to the polls in New York. All the pollsters, the self-styled experts, the gamblers, have made him an odds-on favorite. Little wonder Mr. and Mrs. Dewey start the fateful day all smiles. Meanwhile, in Independence, Missouri, the Truman family arrives at the polling place without fuss or fanfare. The president, a hard-fighting campaign behind him, is relaxed and assured. If the Trumans have any doubt of the outcome, it doesn't show.
And I don't remember the status, but there came a time when we had no idea who was going to win, and we were sent to bed anyway. This was a disciplined family.
Now it's election night, and the returns are beginning to come in. Hundreds of workers in radio stations and newspaper offices are busy tabulating first results. It's the presidential battle that amazes commentator H.V. Kaltenborn.
For the first time since 1916, the United States faces a country so evenly divided in a national election that no one knows, hours and hours after the polls had closed, who is to be the next president of the United States.
The handwriting on the wall, dramatic finest to 1948's election day of surprises. And over at Republican headquarters, stunned diehards just refuse to believe it's true.
About 4 o'clock in the morning, the Secret Service woke him up and said, you're winning. And he said, well, I guess we all better get dressed and go back to Kansas City then.
He got dressed and they drove back, arriving at the Mulebach Hotel in Kansas City at 6 or 6:30 in the morning to find some of his groggy-eyed subordinates who'd been staying up all night. He startled everybody by striding in, and then it was commotion from that point on.
Harry Truman has accomplished one of the political miracles of our time.
In the morning, I remember Dad coming in, his bathrobe and slippers. I don't know what time, I suppose mid-morning, maybe earlier than that, and told us that we'd lost. And that was that. No further discussion.
Wil je meer? Abonneer.